Congratulations! You've been chosen to work at a remote research facility in the beautiful mountains of Switzerland. At the Alpensignal Observatorium, you'll be at the forefront of technology, science, and a never-ending ambition to scour the stars. Your job at Outpost Alpha is simple. Monitor signals from space, maintain the facility, and most importantly, we're sure that you'll find the work here very rewarding, and we're excited to see what you can do at ASO. Don't forget to smile, because you're changing the world. Voices of the Void is one of the most unique games that I've played in a very long time. The game follows a character named Dr. Kell, a researcher assigned to work at the ASO satellite facility. At any given point, there are thousands of frequencies traveling through space. So Kell's job is to analyze them to see if any of them really mean anything. However, as our time at this facility goes on, it slowly starts to become clear that there's something else out here with us. And what unfolds is perhaps one of the most unsettling experiences that I've ever played. Now, the horror of this game doesn't come from a monster constantly chasing you or cheap jump scares. Rather, it's a dread that slowly creeps in when you aren't paying attention. It's the unease that you feel when the lights shut off in the middle of the night, when you swear that you heard something, but you know that you're alone. Very seldom anymore do you find horror games that opt to take this slow burn approach, and Voices of the Void does so impressively. And although this game is still an alpha, I find that it still offers a ton of content worth investigating. So if that little summary sounds interesting at all to you, please by all means go and check the game out before you watch this video. This is one of those games where it's best experienced blind, and I really don't want to rob you guys of that. However, with that disclaimer now out of the way, we're going to go ahead and get into it. Before we get into the game's main story, it's critical for us to experience the tutorial. Now, while in most games something like this would be pretty unnecessary to talk about, there's actually a secret narrative here that's become pretty infamous within the community. In fact, when I said that I was going to be talking about this game, one of my own viewers mentioned how I absolutely needed to check out the tutorial, as in their words, it's not as linear as it first appears to be. And God, if there's one thing that I love, it's vague, ominous messages. So I booted up the tutorial to see if there was anything that I could find. Upon first glance though, everything was pretty normal. The game walks you through basic motor functions like how to walk, jump, and pick up objects before teaching you the more advanced mechanics like finding signals or repairing servers. As I began to work a bit more through this tutorial though, I started to notice some hints of something more sinister behind the scenes. There were these weird messages hidden in corners and other areas that read things like, "Does this place look familiar to you?" And "I can't remember anything." Now, the tutorial area itself already has this liminality to it, as it's obviously inspired by the pool rooms, but these messages make the whole place feel a lot more hostile, almost like the game doesn't want us to find what it's hiding. Past this though, we'll reach another part of the tutorial, where we're taught how to repair damaged transformers. But what's this? It looks like there's another message icon on top of the transformer. So, wanting to make sure that we don't miss another step in the process here, we climb up to read what it says. It has to be that way. Now, it's hard to say what these messages must mean thus far, but to me, they almost seem to be an internal dialogue of whoever left them here. Maybe that's why this whole section feels weird and dreamlike. Maybe this tutorial isn't happening in a training facility, but rather in someone's head. Right now, that's just a theory though. We won't really know what's fully going on here until we dive a bit deeper. Next to this message though, we're able to find a key, but looking around, there aren't any apparent places that we could use it. All of the doors that we've seen thus far are these high-tech sliding doors, using either a keycard or a passcode. They don't require a traditional key. So I decided to continue into the final section of the tutorial, but when I did, I found this. At the bottom of this pit, we'll find human bones and a final message that reads, "Quit. And with no way to get back out of this tunnel, we're forced to exit back out to the main menu. Now, it was at this point where I really wanted to explore the tutorial. All of these hints and clues that we'd been seeing up until this point surely couldn't have just been leading to an exit back out to the menu. It felt like the game was hiding something here, that the tutorial was mere camouflage for something much darker. So I went back in, and this time I tried my best to uncover any unseen content that I'd missed before. The first place that I wanted to investigate was this weird balcony in the first room. While we were never prompted to explore it before, from the looks of it, it seemed like it led to another area. So we drag over a nearby table and hop up. And sure enough, there's a winding hallway that stretches further into the facility. Strangely though, after enough walking, the hallway suddenly stops. And at the dead end, we can find a piece of paper with a note on it, which reads, "Behind you." Now, I could not properly put in the words the dread that this note made me feel. Something about this tutorial just feels so uncomfortable. It kind of reminds me of those old school creepypastas that you used to see about haunted games. The atmosphere here just has a really unsettling nature to it. And now the notion that the game itself is actively hiding things from us really makes my skin crawl. However, when we turn to face what the note warned us about here, we'll find that there's nothing there, just a dark hallway staring back at us. Walking back out the way that we came, we'll notice a strange object sitting on the uppermost window, and if we jump up and grab it, we'll learn that it's a radioactive capsule. And while we don't know what this is used for yet, this item will become very important later. A bit further on, we can find another one of those radioactive capsules hiding atop one of the slides. And after a few attempts of throwing all the junk in our inventory at it, we'll manage to knock it down and take it with us. It was after this, though, that I began to hit a bit of a wall again. I was able to find the things that I'd already uncovered, like the key and the hidden messages, but it still seemed like I was missing something pretty significant here. I checked out the windows, the vents, I went to this weird crack in the wall, I went to the room with the slides again, the transformer room, the server room. It was all just getting so frustrating. Wait a minute, did you hear that? It almost sounds like the wall here is hollow. Yeah, that definitely sounds different than the rest of them. Well, just when I think I'm out, they pull me back in. Tempted by pure curiosity, I decided to hop in the vent to see where this would go. And after climbing a ladder and climbing through even more vents, this happened. Whatever place that we've now found ourselves in is certainly not part of the tutorial. This room that we've fallen into is massive, and it's far larger than any other part of the map that we've seen thus far. A message in front of us reads, "So many friends, yet so lonely." Investigating this area a bit more reveals that there isn't a clear exit. However, there are two more messages that we can find. One saying, "The accident has been stuck in my head for too long." And the other, "It's all fun and games, but I'm not laughing." Looking around this room a bit more though, we'll eventually find 4 different pedestals in each of the corners, all of which depict a different shape. And conveniently enough, we'll also find these shapes lying around at different parts of the chamber. Now, our goal here is to drag each of the shapes back to their corresponding pedestal. And when we finally do, a secret path opens up. We'll follow this path until we eventually reach a ladder, and beyond that is yet another vent that we have to hop down. However, this time, instead of another room, this vent simply drops us into a pit from which we can't escape. Down here are several bones, boxes, and most importantly, another one of those radioactive capsules that we can pick up. However, from here, it seems that there's no legitimate method for us to claw our way out of here. Now, I spent roughly an hour or so down here in the dark, stacking boxes, hitting walls, and searching for any secret buttons or doorways, but there were none. And unfortunately, I had to resort to asking Google how to progress from here. I know, I'm sorry, it's stupid. I'm supposed to be the cool video essayist that figures out everything, but when I explain what I was supposed to do here, I think you'll understand. You see, what I was supposed to do to progress from here was ragdoll my body and respawn at the beginning of the tutorial, from which I would then need to turn around and activate a secret panel in the wall, revealing a keyhole that my key was then able to unlock, which then activates a secret grate inside of the water pool that we find in the first room. I mean, seriously, kudos to whoever was able to find this out on their own, because I would have never been able to guess that that was what I needed to do. Eventually, though, we'll come across 3 circular slots, and if we place those radioactive capsules that we found earlier into them, it causes the drain ahead of us to open, revealing yet another hidden passage. And after navigating more flooded tunnels and narrowly avoiding drowning, we finally arrive at what may be the most unsettling part of this tutorial. In front of us awaits a pitch black labyrinth, which is nearly impossible not to get lost in. In fact, while I was in this maze, I got stuck in the same spot several different times, and the only way that I knew this was because I passed the same message over and over, which read, "It can hear us. Be quiet." And just then, we'll hear something bellow out from deep within the tunnels. Whatever that thing is, I don't want to be lost when it gets here. After enough stumbling around, we'll bump into what looks like the exit. It's a gray industrial courtyard with a single dying tree in the middle of it. However, from what I could tell, there was no escape from the maze beyond this. The doors here don't open, and we're unable to climb the tree and get up to the roof. So, with that, we're forced back into the maze to find another way out. As we work our way through it, the distant noises from before grow louder and louder, and it seems that whatever is in here with us is getting closer. By some stroke of luck, though, we eventually find another exit out of the maze, this one taking us into a dark chamber filled with water. But suddenly, we hear the roar again. This time, it's louder than ever before. Unbeknownst to us, it seems that we've stumbled into the nest of whatever lurks in here. And by the sound of things, it isn't too happy to see us. We frantically search for a way back out before finding a ladder that takes us back up to safety. As we reach the next room, we'll hear a final desperate cry from whatever had been roaming in the halls beneath us, and we feel a bit safer knowing that we're now finally out of the darkness. Here, we'll climb up some nearby pipes and read another one of those messages that the person before us had left behind. "It's eating me from the inside. I can't take it anymore." It's worth noting in here that the windows and the doors of this room in particular are blocked by bars, much like what you would see in a prison cell. As I mentioned earlier in this video, I think that whatever world that we're experiencing here is within our character's mind, and it seems that they've had some sort of traumatic experience that they're trying to keep locked up in here. Maybe that creature that we heard before is this trauma personified. Up until now, we've seen several warnings telling us to stop digging around for answers. Perhaps this is because the memory of whatever happened is just too painful to dig up. This theory's backed up by several of the messages that we've read up until this point. The author of them mentions how the accident is still stuck in their head and references how they've grown isolated from their friends and family. Now, it's unclear to us what this traumatic incident may have been, but maybe as we explore a bit further, there will be some more that we can uncover. Moving onward from here, though, we'll find a few more puzzles and a few more messages, although none of them are too dissimilar to what we've seen thus far. The puzzles get a bit more difficult and the messages get a bit more frantic, but aside from that, there isn't too much new here, and after a while, we reach what is now the final room of the tutorial. Inside of this room sits some furniture, a balcony, and 2 last messages from the author. I'm starting to lose grip on my reality. I should tell them everything I know. And wrong place, wrong time. With no other way to progress from here, we jump over the balcony to see if there's anything else to find. But we're simply dropped back in at the beginning section of this area. So, from what I can tell, this room is meant to be the end of the tutorial. Before we can continue into the analysis of all of this, though, I just want to take a quick moment to tell you guys about today's sponsor, War Thunder. War Thunder is plain and simple the best vehicle combat game ever made. You can take command of over 2,500 tanks, planes, helicopters, boats, everything ranging from the biplanes and armored cars of the 1920s to the fighter jets and modern battle tanks of today. The combat here feels legit, the vehicles look fantastic, and the game, in my opinion, is the best on the market in terms of vehicle combat. Nothing else comes close to it. Join a worldwide community of over 95 million players today and delve into the breathtaking experience that is War Thunder. It's available right now for free on PC, consoles, and mobile devices. Just make sure to use my link down in the description to sign up. If you make a new account, or if you haven't played in 6 months, you'll also receive a massive bonus pack with tons of goodies to give you a head start in the game. This offer is only available for limited time though, so if you're interested in it, make sure to claim it now. As always though, an enormous thank you goes out to the War Thunder team for sponsoring today's video. And with that being said, let's get back to it. So naturally, there is a lot to unpack here. Earlier, we hypothesized that these strange hidden areas represented some form of repressed traumatic memory. And after finishing the tutorial, I still think that that's the best interpretation here. Nearly every clue scattered throughout the tutorial points towards our character trying to suppress or escape a terrible event from their past. And ironically, it's our own curiosity that prevents that from happening. By continuing to explore in the tutorial, we're forcing our character to confront memories that they desperately want to leave buried. But what exactly could this traumatic event be? Well, right now, it's impossible to say with any certainty. My interpretation is that the trauma stems from a drowning or another accident involving water. At one point, we'll hear the protagonist remark that the accident is still stuck in their head, and that line, combined with the constant water imagery in this setting, feels a bit too deliberate to ignore. Of course, that's only my interpretation, right? It's just as likely that the game is trying to send a completely different message that I just didn't pick up on. So if you guys disagree with me here, or you have your own theories on what all of this could mean, I'd really love to hear them down below. Point being with all of this though, this is an absolutely insane amount of detail to put into a game's tutorial. Not only is this content optional, but it's also intentionally hidden away. The majority of players won't be able to find this sort of thing on their own, and it genuinely makes you feel like you're uncovering something that you weren't supposed to. If the rest of the game goes as deep as this tutorial level does, then we're definitely in for a treat. Before we can dive into the main game though, it's important to note that every playthrough of Voices of the Void is different. Events that occur during one player's experience may never happen in another's. Prior to this playthrough that I'll be covering today, I spent several shorter runs simply learning the ropes, and in each one there was different encounters and events that changed the way that I felt during the game. Now, the reason I bring this up is because if you're an experienced player, there's a good chance that I'll miss a few details here and there during this analysis. But with that said, I'll do my best to provide as comprehensive a breakdown as possible. The story here begins with us arriving at the property gate, suitcase in hand. It's already dark outside, so if we're going to be getting any real rest tonight, we'll need to find our way to the facility as soon as possible. However, upon inspection, the nearby guard shack is empty. Strangely, there's no one here waiting for us. No one to ask for directions. Meaning, if we're going to make it to the base, we're going to have to find it ourselves. Luckily for us though, we'll quickly find some signs pointing us in the right direction. So we continue along the path and into the darkness. As we make our way through the woods, however, something strange begins to happen. Faint noises echo from somewhere beyond the tree line. It's difficult to tell exactly what we're hearing or even where it's coming from, but the sounds are there nonetheless. This encounter is enough for us to put a bit more pep in our step, and after stumbling our way through the darkness, we'll eventually find ourselves in front of the Alpen Signal Observatorium, our home for the next few months. The state of this base, though, immediately caught me off guard. The parking lot here was littered with trash, and stepping inside only made things worse. Every room in the building was cluttered with debris, as if whoever had been stationed here before us had simply stopped caring. even stranger though was this entire facility, for whatever reason, was filled with mannequins. Dozens of them. Why a remote research station needed mannequins could be anyone's guess, but it's safe to say that at this point I was a bit unsettled. The first thing that I did here was try to find all of the different light switches, and as the lights to the building flickered back on, I started hauling bags of garbage outside, trying to make the place feel at least somewhat livable. And while I did this, I slowly familiarized myself with the layout of the base. At the heart of it all was the control room. Now, this was the room where I'd spend most of my time, processing radio signals from space in hopes of finding something worth investigating. This room also housed the station's radar system, which monitored movement across the entire property. If anything that wasn't me started moving around the property again, this station should notify me, which, as you could probably guess, would become massively important later on in the playthrough. Across the hall from here was the garage. Inside were workbenches, supply crates, and an ATV that would become my primary method of getting around. Every day I would be sent out to different satellite dishes scattered across the property, so having a means of transportation that wasn't just walking around was pretty nice. Down in the basement I would find the facility's power system, which had rows of breakers designed to control different parts of the base. There was also a massive industrial furnace down here that I could use to burn trash, as well as those creepy mannequins that I kept finding around. Better yet, burning garbage down here actually generated fuel for my ATV, making the furnace one of the most useful pieces of equipment that I had throughout the entire facility. There was, however, one part of the basement that immediately stood out to me: a large walk-in freezer. Inside of it, I could see several hanging cow carcasses, and for some reason, someone had jammed a chair beneath the door handle to keep it shut. Presumably to keep someone or something locked inside. Even after removing this chair though, the door here refused to open. Whether it was locked or simply frozen shut, I couldn't tell. For now though, I decided to leave it alone, as the top floor was much more welcoming. It was there that I'd find my living quarters, a small bedroom, kitchen, bathroom, and a balcony overlooking the parking lot. The balcony even came with a telescope, making it the perfect place to unwind after a long day of work. Once I had finally gotten settled inside the base though, I decided to spend the rest of my first day exploring the rest of the property. And the first place that caught my attention was the massive radio tower overlooking the parking lot. And from the top of it, I had an unobstructed view of nearly the entire valley, making this an excellent vantage point if anything ever popped up on my radar. Next to the radio tower though was an old concrete bunker, and when I went to investigate that, I found a handwritten note warning anyone who found it not to enter. Unfortunately for me though, I can't read, so I tried to open it anyway, but the heavy steel door here was locked. I tried every code that I managed to find throughout the facility, but unfortunately, nothing worked. Whatever had been sealed away down there would just have to remain a mystery, at least for now. Aside from that stuff though, the property's layout was pretty simple. The main facility sat in the center of the valley, and it was surrounded by 24 satellite dishes, 3 transformers, and 3 radar towers. Over the coming weeks, I'd slowly memorize the fastest routes between all of them, making the most of my time outside. Eventually though, after a full day of cleaning and exploring, exhaustion finally caught up with me, and my first day would come to an end. Over the coming days, I'd complete my daily assignments and spend the rest of my time cleaning up the disaster that the previous occupant had left behind. It's honestly a bit difficult to describe just how filthy this place was. You could spend several minutes clearing out a single corner of the base and still feel like you barely made a dent in it. This cleanup wasn't entirely mindless though. Buried beneath some of the piles of garbage were data drives, tools, and other useful supplies. Before long, it became difficult to tell what was actually trash and what might end up being important later, so I tried to store as much of the stuff as I could. Once I'd finally made the base a little bit more livable though, I started venturing away from it, and almost immediately I began noticing the pillars. You see, all over the property, I started to see these strange concrete pillars sticking up and out of the ground. Now, at first, I assumed that these were some sort of survey markers or old boundary posts put up by the old scientists, but that theory quickly fell apart. Their placement around the property made absolutely zero sense. Some of them stood directly in the middle of roads, while others were scattered randomly throughout the forest. There wasn't any obvious pattern to them. And despite searching the facility, I couldn't find a single document explaining why they existed. But simply, the more I noticed them, the stranger they became. While exploring further into the woods, I also discovered a section of forest surrounded by chain link fencing. And oddly enough, it wasn't marking the edge of the property. This was fencing off a seemingly random patch of forest right in the middle of the woods. Whatever was here had clearly been important enough for someone to want to secure it, but from what I could tell, there wasn't an easy way to get in here. Eventually though, my wandering led me east, where I stumbled across a small abandoned cabin. Now, the building itself wasn't particularly remarkable here, but the moment I managed to get inside, I heard something bizarre. Now, I don't know about you guys, but that sounded eerily familiar. In fact, it was almost identical to what we heard back in the maze during the tutorial. Now, up until now, the main game had been relatively quiet. I wasn't really comfortable yet, but there wasn't anything that had given me cause for alarm. However, hearing that cry just now, though, was enough to convince me to end the exploration for the day. So I climbed out of the cabin and headed straight back for base. The rest of the evening, though, was pretty uneventful by comparison. I processed a couple more signals and cleaned up a little longer, but eventually I decided to call it a night. The next day, I ventured out once again. This time, I decided to go west and stumbled across an abandoned construction site. Two excavators sat motionless in the dirt where they'd been left, surrounded by several bunkhouses that once served as sleeping quarters for the workers. Now, though, they were completely empty, save for a few rusting metal bed frames. In one of these buildings, though, I found a book titled Ancient Aliens tucked away up underneath of one of the beds, and its presence immediately stood out to me. Maybe the workers here had been seeing some strange activity prior to my arrival, and they had this book as a way of trying to explain it. However, now that I mention it, where are the construction workers? In fact, where is anyone? We haven't seen anyone else on the entire property thus far. Surely we're not supposed to be the only people here, right? Near the construction site, I found what looked to be an experiment of some kind. Surrounded by equipment was a grate that appeared to cover up a bottomless pit. And when I say bottomless here, I mean bottomless. When I looked down it, I could not see any visible end to it. Next to all of this, we'll find a badge, a data drive, and a note which reads, Day 41. We finally got more financial support for our mission. We can get deeper this time. But today, I noticed something interesting. The hole made one deep, bassy sound. I couldn't record it, and I don't know if it was a naturally made sound, but it sounds like a really deep metal squeak. This hole is pretty weird. Now, this note doesn't mention any sort of goal for this project other than going deeper, but some evidence nearby reveals what the scientists here may have been using this hole for. Just outside of this area, we can find a small landfill with dumpsters and all kinds of other trash lying around on the ground. And as we know, the ASO research facility has a very noticeable trash problem. So I think that it's possible that the scientists were using this hole as a way of getting rid of some of the garbage and other junk from the facility, although as of right now, we have no way of confirming that. When I returned to the base later that evening, I tried to use that security badge I found to unlock the bunker I found earlier, but nothing. The door still refused to open. Whatever this badge was meant for, this door wasn't it. The data drive that I found at the experiment site, however, seemed far more promising, so I decided to hold on to that until I had a chance to analyze its contents. After all of that, though, I finally laid down in bed, and it was that night that I had my first nightmare. As I laid in bed, I found myself standing in a vast, dark chamber, lined with towering pillars. Shadowy figures slowly emerged from the darkness, surrounding me from each direction. And just before they reached me, I woke up. One of my favorite things about Voices of the Void is just how patiently it builds its tension. The game familiarizes you with all of these different systems, and after a while, you sort of get comfortable in the mundanity of them. You don't worry about anything happening to you while you sleep, because nothing ever happens to you while you sleep. Until the one night where it does. And while this nightmare might be the first time that we've seen this sort of concept in action, it certainly won't be the last. The following day, though, was relatively uneventful. I collected my signals, repaired a few satellite dishes, and spent some more time exploring the property, but nothing particularly interesting happened. That all changed after nightfall. While checking the radar, I noticed a lone contact sitting near the edge of the map. Curious, I climbed the observation tower outside of the base to see if I could spot whatever had triggered it, but the valley was completely still. No movements, no sounds. The silence was almost unnerving. After scanning the horizon for what felt like several minutes, I eventually gave up and headed back inside. Whatever had triggered the radar was either gone or didn't want to be seen. It was from that point forward that I decided to make a small upgrade to the base. You see, I installed a radar alarm that would automatically alert me whenever something entered the property. If there really was something else wandering around these mountains with me, I wanted to know the moment it arrived. The following day, I continued breaking down some of the supply crates scattered throughout the basement, using the scrap to produce fuel for the furnace. However, it was while moving these crates around that I found something unexpected. A hidden panel. Built into one of the walls was what looked like some sort of access panel, and after fiddling with it for a few moments, the cover popped free, revealing a solid concrete wall behind it. To say that my curiosity was piqued here would be an understatement, so naturally, I grabbed my hammer, and after several swings, the concrete to this wall gave way, opening a passage into what appeared to be a much older section of the facility. The change in architecture here was immediate. Gone were the metallic walls and fluorescent lights. Instead, the room here looked ancient, almost forgotten. It reminded me of some of the hidden areas that we saw in the tutorial level, only this place felt darker, less dreamlike. Now, at first, I had assumed that I must have stumbled across some massive secret beneath the facility, but after searching around a bit, I didn't find anything. The passage here just abruptly ended before it really went anywhere. Now, in all honesty, this area wasn't really much of a discovery, but even still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just done something wrong, like I'd opened myself up to something monstrous beneath the facility. So, before leaving here, I dragged the remaining supply crates over and stacked them up in front of the opening. And while realistically this probably wouldn't stop anything, it was enough to give me a small bit of comfort, at least for now. That evening, I spent my time scanning for more signals, and I even processed the data from the drive that we found back at the bottomless pit. And when listening back to it, I heard that same deep noise that the other scientists mentioned hearing at the site. What could this noise be? Is there some sort of creature living down in the hole? Or is this noise from the Earth itself? As of right now, it's yet another mystery that we don't yet have the answer to. I think the thing that weirds me out the most about everything that we've seen thus far, though, are the lack of other researchers. At no point through our time here have we encountered anyone, and just by looking around, it's pretty clear that this research facility used to be crowded with people. So where have they all gone? Perhaps ASO is simply on its way out, and they've been forced to downsize just to keep the lights on. But even then, just having one person to manage this entire facility by themselves is a bit much. And that's something that you can even feel in the gameplay. The first couple of days, I had time to explore and look around a bit, but now it's getting to the point where I feel lucky to have my work done before nightfall. The odd activity around the property wasn't really helping me focus either. That radar alarm that I had installed began to constantly go off, which was a big source of anxiety for me. Again, I would climb the radio tower for a better vantage point, but again, I would find nothing. Oddities began to continue even inside the safety of the base. There was another night where I was up late working when the lights inside suddenly began to flicker, and when I went to investigate it, I found where something had tipped over one of the vending machines. Even stranger though, there had been several lockers put in the original place where it sat. Now, at first, that doesn't sound too strange, except these lockers are completely immovable. You can't push them, you can't pick them up. By every rule that the game had established thus far, there was simply no way that they could have been there. And yet, here they were. After this though, I decided that I'd move the vending machine into the break room, since now there was no other room for it, and then I went back to work. However, just a short while later, I returned to the break room, and it was there that something froze me in my tracks. Standing directly in front of the vending machine was a dark humanoid figure. It remained still only for a moment, before the light suddenly flickered once again, and the figure disappeared out of existence. Now, at that point, I couldn't help but wonder what I'd seen, and what its intentions were. Perhaps it just wanted us to move the vending machine into the break room, so as a sort of peace offering, I decided to move the other vending machines down there as well. I didn't know if this would really do anything at the time, but at the bare minimum, it'd at least give me a bit more peace of mind. But this is exactly the sort of thing that I meant earlier when I was talking about the horror of the familiar. Up until this point, those vending machines had been nothing more than background decorations. However, now, every time that I passed one, I'd find myself expecting to see this entity again. Voices of the Void excels at turning the ordinary into something deeply unsettling. It quietly corrupts the things that you've grown comfortable with until even the most mundane parts of your day start making you uneasy. However, it was with this that my first week at the facility eventually came to an end. And as a reward for completing all of my assignments on time, I actually received a small bonus. And I immediately put this to good use, purchasing a mop to continue cleaning the base, along with several security cameras. Now, up until this point, my radar had been detecting strange activity almost every night, but I'd never been able to catch what was actually causing it. I'd drive out to the coordinates and search the surrounding area, but I'd find absolutely nothing. And then by the time I'd returned to base, the radar contact would have either moved somewhere else entirely or just disappear altogether. So it was here that I came up with a different approach. Rather than chasing down all of this weird activity myself, I'd instead let it come to me. I installed cameras at several points of interest all around the property, including the radio tower, the construction site, and one of the satellite dishes where the radar had detected movement. My hope was that if something ever appeared there again, that I'd finally be able to get a good look at it. But when I began to travel back to the base to make sure that they were working, I noticed something sitting down in the valley below. 2 triangular craft. They hovered silently above the ground, perfectly still. And for a moment, I wondered whether I was actually seeing what I thought I was seeing. Up until now, every strange encounter that I had been ambiguous. It'd be a mysterious noise off in the distance, or a glimpse of something late at night. But this wasn't. These were unmistakably UFOs. The moment that I began driving towards them, however, both of the craft disappeared without a trace. Investigating the area where they'd been hovering revealed something equally strange. Resting on the ground was a device emitting a faint, rhythmic hum. Whatever this was far too heavy to move, so I couldn't take it back to base with me. Nearby, though, were 2 miniature replicas of the craft, sitting beside a pile of discarded shrimp containers. I took these miniature ships back to the base for safekeeping, leaving everything else exactly where I found it. And once I got back, I noticed something interesting. You see, those UFOs that I found looked nearly identical to one depicted on a poster inside of the facility, which meant I wasn't the first person stationed here to see them. Perhaps that's what happened to the previous researchers. Maybe they were taken by whatever these things were. It would certainly explain the abandoned state of the facility, along with the Ancient Aliens book that we found earlier at the construction site. Of course, though, that's still just speculation. All I know is that I am very happy that we put up those cameras. In addition to the security cameras, though, I also had enough money left over to purchase a Kerferbot, a little robot that could travel around the property on its own, repairing broken servers whenever they went offline. Having one less daily responsibility meant that I finally had a bit more freedom to investigate the property for more anomalies. But as it turns out, I wouldn't have to look very far. The very next morning, as I was getting ready to head out on my daily rounds, I noticed something sitting just outside of the garage. It was a door. Not attached to a building or anything else, just a plain wooden door upright in the middle of the grass. It was completely out of place, like someone had copied it from a different place entirely and just dropped it into this one. So naturally, I tried to interact with it, but nothing. The strangest part, though, was what happened when I checked the radar. See, this door, for whatever reason, appeared as an active entity. Whatever this thing was, the game considered it to be alive. For the time being, though, there wasn't much that I could really do here except leave it alone and wait to see if it did anything. Later that day, while making my usual rounds, I stumbled across the same triangular UFOs that I'd seen before, hovering in the exact same spot in the valley. And just like last time, they disappeared the moment that I got too close. This time, however, I noticed something that I hadn't before. It appeared that the ships here weren't simply hovering at random. They instead seemed to be gathered around one of those strange stone pillars that I'd seen scattered throughout the property. Now, these pillars had bothered me ever since I first arrived. They blocked roads and had no logical pattern to their placement whatsoever. There wasn't a single mention of them anywhere inside the facility, which made me doubt that they'd been built by the researchers at all. Perhaps these pillars weren't part of the facility. Maybe they were alien. And if these ships kept returning to them, perhaps they weren't random landmarks, but instead meeting places. For now, though, all I could do was keep watching and wait to see if the visitors returned. It was sometime around this that I redeveloped an interest in that bunker door outside again, and I became determined to find a way inside of it. While browsing the store page one day, I found something called a password changer, which promised to change the code of any sealed door. And seeing this as the obvious solution to my problem here, I ordered it, only to quickly find out that it didn't work. This door just didn't make sense to me. The codes from inside of the base didn't work, the badge I found didn't work, and now the password changer that I bought specifically to open this door didn't work. I mean, surely the developers wouldn't just throw in a random keypad that you couldn't unlock. Wait a second. Do you see that? That looks like a key card. If I can find some way to grab this key card out of the slot, maybe I could use it to open the door. I eventually decided that a hook seemed like a reasonable bet. So I bought one and tried it out, and sure enough, I managed to get the key card. And with it, I was finally able to get the bunker door unlocked. I wondered what kind of terror lay beneath this bunker door, and I was horrified to realize that it was another locked door, believe it or not. However, for whatever reason, I was able to use the password changer on this door, which didn't really make sense to me, but at this point, I wasn't complaining. Inside appeared to be a workshop of some kind, sealed off from the rest of the facility. However, the only interesting thing that we find down here is a binder labeled Kerfer Omega documents. Now, as we already know from before, Kerfers are the little robots that we can buy, and inside of this binder seems to be schematics on how to upgrade one. However, this doesn't look like it'll be a very straightforward process, as some of the parts that we need are said to be buried out in the woods, and we'll need a metal detector and something to dig them up if we're going to be able to get them. So for now, this project will be on the back burner. It was around this point, though, that activity around the property really began to escalate. I started receiving more strange signals that appeared to come from alien spacecraft, and my radar began detecting far more movement than it ever had before. It was also around this time that I discovered that you could take the coordinates displayed on the radar and plug them directly into your compass, allowing you to pinpoint exactly where the activity on the radar was occurring. So one morning, I decided to put that to the test. One of my radar towers had picked up movement near the edge of the property, so I entered the coordinates into my compass, climbed onto my ATV, and set off. And at first, there was nothing. The valley sat completely still, just as it had every other time I'd searched it. And after several minutes of wandering around, I eventually gave up and turned to head back towards base. But just then, a colossal orb of light suddenly rose above the tree line. It was so bright that it illuminated an entire section of the forest beneath it. Several smaller lights orbited the larger one as it silently drifted through the woods, disappearing behind the trees before emerging again further down the valley. It almost looked as though it was searching for something. Eventually, it vanished behind the tree line once more, seemingly for good. And that's when the fog rolled in. Within seconds, a dense fog swallowed the valley around me, immediately giving me the impression that it was time to leave. So I turned the ATV around and started back towards the base, but halfway there, the giant orb returned. And this time, it wasn't wandering aimlessly, it was headed straight for me. Now, it may have been that this orb was just curious about me, but I wasn't interested in finding out. I floored the ATV and tore back through the forest as fast as I could. When I finally reached the base, I thought I'd already lost it, but when I got to the control room, I glanced at the radar, and there was a blip directly on top of my position, meaning it had followed me home. For several tense moments, the orb hovered somewhere above the facility, before thankfully disappearing back into the fog. Whatever it was, it had clearly behaved differently from the triangular craft that I'd encountered before. Whether it belonged to the same alien race or was something else entirely, I couldn't say, but it definitely felt like a different kind of entity. Eventually, though, I worked up the nerve to head back outside and finish up my daily tasks. When I returned back to base, though, I noticed something different. The mysterious door that had been standing in the middle of the field was now gone. I searched the surrounding area, but I couldn't find any trace of it. Whatever had brought it here had apparently decided to take it back, leaving the mystery of what lay beyond it unanswered. Over the next several days, not much of note really happened to me. I continued analyzing signals and setting up some additional security cameras, but the only new discovery that I made was an odd cave tucked away in the wilderness. Things were almost beginning to feel normal. It had been several days since I'd experienced anything strange, and most of my time now was just spent repairing the base, improving my equipment, and settling into the routine of life at Alpha Base. The constant unease that I had felt hadn't really disappeared, but it had faded just enough for me to start lowering my guard. But that didn't last long. Before long, I spotted those strange triangular UFOs again. But this time they weren't out in the valley, they were hovering just outside of the base itself. They appeared to be transmitting some kind of signal directly towards the facility. But the moment I approached, the craft would vanish into thin air, just as the ones I'd encountered before. Around this same time, I also witnessed something even stranger. One night, high above the tree line drifted enormous jellyfish-like organisms, slowly floating through the sky as though they were swimming through an invisible ocean. At no point did they attempt to acknowledge me. They simply glided overhead before disappearing into the distance. Unlike the orb and the UFOs before it, these creatures didn't seem interested in the facility at all. They were simply just passing through. Now, by now, it was becoming pretty obvious that the property was home to far more than just one unexplained phenomenon. In addition to the things that I just mentioned, my cameras were beginning to pick up strange sightings from around the property. Near the upper left-hand corner of the map, I spotted some sort of creature making its way up the road. And later that night, my radar detected a different anomaly, this one at the construction site. And when I went to investigate it, I found a lantern flickering in one of the rooms, and beneath it was a notebook containing an excerpt from I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream. Quote, "I am a great soft jelly thing, smoothly rounded with no mouth, with pulsing white holes filled by fog where my eyes used to be, rubbery appendages that were once my arms. Bulks rounding down into legless humps of soft, slippery matter. I leave a moist trail when I move. Blotches of diseased, evil gray come and go on my surface, as though light is being beamed from within. Outwardly, dumbly, I shamble about. A thing that could never have been known as human. A thing whose shape is so alien, a travesty, that humanity becomes more obscene for the vague resemblance. Inwardly alone." Now, for those unfamiliar with this story, this is the point where one of the protagonists is transformed into an immobile mass of flesh. And while this excerpt comes from an entirely different story and universe, its placement here may not be without reason. It could be hinting at what became of the construction workers who once lived in this shack. It's clear that the men who stayed here had encountered, or at the very least knew about, the aliens surrounding the facility, as evidenced by the copy of Ancient Aliens tucked beneath one of the bed frames. Now, the fact that these men are no longer here already suggests that something terrible happened to them. And this excerpt feels like the final piece of that puzzle. Whatever these men encountered didn't simply kill them, it left them with a fate far worse. Over the next few days, several other strange incidents occurred. I found myself being followed by mannequins wherever I went. I encountered bizarre gravity anomalies around the facility, and at one point I was even attacked by a possessed robot. But none of this seemed connected to the aliens or creatures that I'd started to grow interested in. At least, that was the case until I found the campsite. While I was going about my usual morning chores one morning, I began to hear a strange mechanical beeping echoing from the woods next to the base. And curious, I followed the sound until I spotted a strange aircraft silently drifting between the trees. Now, unlike the UFOs that I'd seen before, this one had a diamond shape, and more importantly, it didn't disappear the moment that I looked at it. It simply floated deeper into the forest until it slipped out of sight. Just beyond where it vanished, though, I discovered something even stranger. It was a makeshift treehouse, and it appeared to have been constructed recently. Looking around a bit more, I noticed some of the same technology that I encountered alongside those UFOs I saw about a week earlier. It seems that whatever these entities are, they've now grown comfortable here. Comfortable enough to build themselves a place to stay. I began taking photographs of this campsite and inspecting some of the equipment that they left behind. But the moment that I tried interacting with one of the devices, this happened. I'd apparently triggered some kind of alarm. A loud siren erupted from the box, echoing all throughout the forest. Whatever had built this place now knew I was here. As I stood frozen on the platform, I heard footsteps approaching from somewhere beyond the trees, and seconds later, something invisible burst from the woods and began chasing me. I tried to photograph this creature, hoping that my camera could capture something that my eyes couldn't, but unfortunately, every photo I took looked completely normal. The creature then ripped the camera out of my hands and hurled it back at me, and shoved me to the ground and disappeared into the forest. Strangely, it never tried to kill me. If anything, it almost felt as though it was scolding me for touching something that I wasn't supposed to. Once I finally lost sight of the creature, though, I decided to head back towards base. But before leaving, though, I mounted a security camera overlooking the campsite. If these beings returned, I wanted to know exactly what they were doing here. The rest of my day passed without incident as I finished my remaining work all around the valley. But when I returned back towards base, the security camera that I had just installed was lying on the ground outside of the garage. There weren't any signs of damage and the camera worked perfectly fine, but I was still a bit unsettled. Whatever was living inside of that treehouse didn't want to be watched. Later that night, I heard some footsteps inside of the facility. I suspected that it may have been the same invisible thing that I saw at the treehouse, but there was no way of me knowing for sure. Eventually, I laid my head down and tried to get some rest. The following days passed without much incident, as I was actually starting to grow acquainted with some of the anomalies around the base. As crazy as it sounds, I was actually starting to become comfortable here. At least, that was up until the warning. Sometime during my 4th week at the facility, a massive explosion rocked the building. It was so intense that it knocked me, as well as all of my furniture, across the room. An unfamiliar siren then began to blare, and it was immediately obvious that something big was happening here. And eager to get away from the sound of the alarms, I went outside to see what it was. Located on just the other side of the parking lot was a strange pyramid-like device, which was notably different from any of the other alien technology that I'd seen thus far. And once I approached it, the device emitted a red holographic image which depicted 2 different scenes. Now, the first scene showed a man approaching a small sun or light of some kind before being impacted by it in some way and seemingly killed. And the second one showed the same thing, except for this time, the man ran away from the sun and survived, after which the sun would be beamed up by something, returning the area to normal. Now, it's unclear to us what this might be referring to right now, but the message makes it pretty clear that any strange lights that we encounter should not be approached. And sure enough, just a few nights later, these lights start to make their appearance en masse. I initially began to pick them up on my security cameras, but it wasn't long before they got closer to my base and I could spot them with my own eyes. Based on the warning from before, I decided best not to approach them. In fact, I made the decision to stay inside as much as possible as long as they were here. The sheer amount of orbs that I caught on the cameras was alarming, and with no clear way of avoiding them or fighting back, I decided not to risk it. Looking from the radio tower, these lights seemingly covered every inch of the property, and I began to wonder how long it would be until they finally went away. The transmissions that I received while I was held up inside of the base were pretty concerning too. The entities began transmitting me pictures of the exterior of my base, as if to say, "We know where you live." Much more concerning though would be the pictures that they sent me from inside of the room that I was standing in. I could never get a glimpse of what was doing this though, so I tried my best to brush it off and continue with my work. However, it wasn't long before something else interrupted me though. I heard what sounded like massive footsteps echoing off in the distance, and upon checking my security cameras, I saw it. A towering tripod-like entity slowly walking through the valley. Each of the being's steps shook the earth beneath it, and before long, it had tripped the base's alarms. Strangely enough, though, it didn't seem like this thing was here for me. Instead, it began beaming up the strange orbs that had been harassing me the past week, and once it had finished and gotten them all, it simply turned around and walked back out the way it came. Now, after seeing this, I was dumbfounded. This was by far the craziest thing that I had seen so far, and I honestly didn't know what to make of it. A few days later, while I was out working, I was approached by several smaller tripod-like creatures, which chased me down, yanked me off of my ATV, and briefly examined me before abruptly losing interest. And without harming me any further, these beings simply turned around and went on their way. Over the following days, these strange encounters only became more frequent. I began spotting those tripod creatures all across the valley. UFOs would appear just outside of my windows, and at one point, I even watched a massive mothership drift over the property. Every time that I thought I had a grasp on what was happening, the game introduced something even crazier. Eventually, everything culminated in a full-scale war between multiple alien races right in the middle of the property. And for now, that seems to be where the story ends. Now, as of right now, this game is still in alpha, so much of what's happening here has remained unfinished. The full picture for the story simply isn't available yet, but that doesn't mean that there isn't already a story beginning to emerge here. Now, I think it's fairly obvious that Alpha Root Base acts as a sort of epicenter for alien activity. Throughout our time here, we seem to encounter at least 2 or 3 separate alien races, but aliens aren't the only strange thing that we find here. As you might remember, there were plenty of other bizarre encounters that felt completely unexplainable. The mannequins, the vending machine ghost, the gravity anomalies, and even that weird hole on the property don't really have any clear explanation behind them. I think the people at ASO noticed these strange phenomena long before we arrived and realized something interesting. The activity seemed to intensify the fewer people remained on the property. Now, I mentioned before that I think that some of the workers stationed here died. It's hinted at pretty heavily, and we'll even discover human remains at different points throughout our stay. And I also think that ASO deliberately didn't hire any replacements until they absolutely needed to. It's pretty obvious to us that the last occupant at this base was in pretty bad shape. I mean, all you have to do is look at the base's interior. It's likely that the previous person of our position succumbed to one of the anomalies on the property, and now we've been hired as the most recent replacement. Throughout the game, it's clear that whatever things are operating here are initially cautious around newcomers. It actually takes a couple of weeks before the sightings and anomalies begin to really escalate for us, but once they do, they rapidly spiral out of control. If ASO's mission was truly to monitor extraterrestrial signals and determine whether alien life existed out in the universe, then this scenario would be the perfect experiment. Isolate a single observer in the middle of nowhere, remove every other variable, and simply watch what happens when the aliens finally reveal themselves. And if that was their plan, then it worked perfectly. Throughout our time on the property, we slowly but surely get overrun with different anomalies. This would be incredibly valuable data for this company. So I think that they've intentionally put us in a position where these sort of things would eventually happen. This sort of ambiguity around the story, though, is one of my personal favorite parts about Voices of the Void. I think it's so fun when a game gives you room to theorize and come up with your own personal headcanon for what's happening in the story. Throughout my playthrough, I constantly found myself searching for more information about these creatures and the worlds that they inhabited. And more often than not, I came up with very little, if any, information. Instead, I was left to draw my own conclusions. There aren't pages of lore yet explaining every mystery or neatly answering every question. Instead, the game presents you with these strange events and asks you to make sense of them yourself. You have to follow the rabbit hole, and you have to come up with your own theories. And in a horror game, to me anyway, I think that makes for a far more memorable experience. Voices of the Void is one of the best survival horror games that I've ever played, and the game isn't even finished yet. But what's even crazier is that you can download it right now for free. This game could be out on Steam today and make millions of dollars, but the developers insist on keeping it free, at least until it's out of alpha, which I think speaks volumes about their character. Before I wrap up today's video, I also just want to give another quick thank you to War Thunder for sponsoring me today. If you use my links down below, you'll receive a massive bonus pack, so long as you're a new player or you haven't played in 6 months. War Thunder is available for free on PC, consoles, and mobile devices, and I definitely recommend that you guys go and check them out. As always though, thank you guys so much for taking the time to watch today's video. You know I love you. I'm out.